je pro tebe.
Opravdu? Jiří, ale víš, že je to u tebe pozornost?
Ano, je.
Překvapení?
Dalo by se to tak říct.
Jiří, víš, že jsem dojel?
Ano, vím.
Mohu?
Musíš.
Já jsem tak napjatý.
Ano, si.
Tak to jsi nemusel.
Taková malá pozornost.
Dobrý den. A já vás vítám na 26. dni Měsíce autorského čtení. A dneska tady uvítáme Val McDermid, která se narodila v roce 1955. Většinu nebo vyrůstala v Kirkcaldech ve Five. V 17 byla jako jeden z nejmladších studentů přijata na Oxford a vůbec vlastně jako první studentka, která přišla ze skotské jako veřejné školy, ne z nějakých speciálních škol. Poté se živila jako novinářka. V roce 1984 vydala svůj první román Report for Murder. A od té doby napsala celkem, myslím přesně, teď už to číslo je 28 knih, které vyšly ve více jak 10 milionech kopiích celosvětově. A podle jejich knih byl natočen seriál o televize ITV, Wire in the Blood. Dneska tady bude číst ukázku z románu Retribution, která patří do té série, prostě si jednou velmi, velmi častou postavou, to sami uvidíte. A ještě bych nakonec řekl, že všechny jejich knížky, nebo hodně jejich knížek bylo přeloženo do češtiny a budou tu k dispozici, takže pokud má někdo zájem, tak si je může tady zakoupit potom. So, welcome, Val.
Move this slightly closer to my beer. Thank you very much for inviting me to come here and read. It's a pleasure to be here.
Děkuji za pozvání, že tady můžu přečíst a je to pro mě radost.
The readings tonight are going to be from a novel called The Retribution, which features the clinical psychologist and police profiler Tony Hill and his cop sidekick Carol Jordan.
A dnes to budu číst z románu Retribution, ve které je hlavní postava klinický psycholog Tony Hill a jeho partnerka jakoby v tom ve smyslu prostě kolegyně Carol Hill, Carol
Jordan.
Carol Jordan.
See, my check's improving by leaps and bounds. This is the seventh novel in the series, which began with a book called The Mermaid Singing in 1995.
A toto je 7. knížka v té řadě věnující se tady tohoto konkrétní postavě, která začala románem Mermaid Singing.
When I wrote The Mermaid Singing, I intended it not to be the start of a series, but to be a standalone novel. But when I got to the end of it, I was so interested in the characters of Carol and Tony and the potential for storytelling that resided within them, that I ended up writing this whole series.
A když jsem začala psát Mermaid Singing, tak jsem to považoval jsem to v podstatě jakoby za jenom jednu knížku, nenapadlo mě psát celou sérii, ale tak mě zajímaly ty postavy a Carol a Tonyho, že jsem s nima zůstala a udělal jsem z toho celou sérii.
Now the second book in the series, The Wire in the Blood, featured a particularly twisted serial killer called Jacko Vance, who was eventually sent to prison as a result of the work that Tony and Carol did.
A v druhé knížce, která se jmenovala Wire in the Blood, jak i potom jako ten seriál, tak tam byl zrovna dost jako bláznivý nebo dost šílený sériový vrah. What is the name of the serial killer?
Jacko Vance.
Jacko Vance, yeah. který ho nakonec chytnou a pošlou do vězení.
And this book, The Retribution, deals with the return of Jacko Vance.
A v této knížce Retribution a tak hlavním tím ústředním motivem je, že tady ten sériový vrah se vrací zpátky.
So the first part of the reading is from his point of view. He's still in prison at this point.
První část té knížky, nebo tady tu, kterou budeme číst, tak je vlastně z jeho úhlu pohledu toho sériového vraha, on je zatím pořád ve vězení.
So I think you're going to see what's up there behind me. You're already reading ahead, aren't you?
Už čtete, že jo?
Escapology was like magic. The secret lay in misdirection. Some escapes were accomplished by creating an illusion through careful planning. Others were genuine feats of strength, daring, and flexibility, both mental and physical. And some were mixtures of both. But whatever the methods, the element of misdirection always played a crucial role. And when it came to misdirection, he called no man his master. Best of all was the misdirection that the onlooker didn't even know was happening. To accomplish that, you had to make your diversion blend into the spectrum of normal. Some settings made that harder than others. Take an office where everything ran like clockwork. You'd struggle to camouflage a distraction there because anything out of the ordinary would stand out and stick in people's minds. But in prison, there were so many unpredictable variables, volatile individuals, complex power structures, trivial disputes that could go nuclear in a matter of moments, and pent-up frustrations never far from bursting like a ripe zit. Almost anything could go off at any time, and who could say whether it was a calculated event or just one of 100 little local difficulties getting out of hand? The very existence of those variables made some people uneasy, but not him. For him, every alternate scenario provided a fresh opportunity, another option to scrutinize, till finally he hit on the perfect combination of circumstances and characters. He'd considered faking it, paying a couple of the lads to get into a ruck on the wing, but there were too many downsides to that. For one thing, the more people who knew about his plans, the more prospects there were for betrayal. For another, most of the people inside were there because their previous attempts at dissimulation had failed dismally. Probably not the best people to entrust with putting on a convincing performance then. And you could never rule out plain stupidity, of course. So faking it was out. However, the beauty of prison was that there was never a shortage of levers to pull. Men trapped on the inside were always prey to fears of what might be going down on the outside. They had lovers, wives, kids, and parents who were vulnerable to violence or temptation, or just the threat of those things. So he'd watched and waited, gathering data and evaluating it, figuring out where the possibilities offered the best chance of success. It helped that he didn't have to rely on his own observations. His support system beyond the walls had provided the intelligence that plugged most of the gaps in his own knowledge. It really hadn't taken long to find the perfect pressure point. And now he was ready. Tonight he would make his move. Tomorrow night he'd be sleeping in a wide, comfortable bed with feather pillows, the perfect end to a perfect evening. A rare steak with a pile of garlic mushrooms and rusty potatoes, perfectly complemented by a bottle of claret that would have only improved in the dozen years he'd been away. A plate of crisp Bath Olivers and a long Clausen Stilton to take away the bad taste of what passed for cheese in prison. Then a long hot bath, a glass of cognac and a Cuban cohiba. He'd savour every gradation on the spectrum of the senses. A jagged cacophony of raised voices penetrated his visualization. A routine argument about football crashing back and forth across the landing. An officer roared at them to keep the noise down, and it subsided a little. The distant mutter of a radio filled the gaps between the insults, and it occurred to him that even better than the steak, the booze and the cigar would be the freedom from other people's noise. That was the one thing people never mentioned when they sounded off about how awful it must be to be in prison. They talked about the discomfort, the lack of freedom, the fear of your fellow inmates, the loss of your personal comforts. But even the most imaginative never commented on the nightmare of losing silence. Tomorrow, that nightmare would be over. He could be as quiet or as loud as he chose, but it would be his noise. Well, mostly his. There would be other noises, ones that he was looking forward to, ones he liked to imagine when he needed a spur to keep going, ones he'd been dreaming about even longer than he'd been figuring out his escape route. The screams, the sobs, the stammering pleas for mercy that would never come. The soundtrack of Payback. Jacko Vance, killer of 17 teenage girls, murderer of a serving police officer, a man once voted the sexiest man on British TV, could hardly wait. So, now we have been introduced to Jacko.
Tohle bylo představení Jacko.
And it's time to be introduced to Tony Hill, our sort of hero.
A teď je čas si představit Tonyho Hilla, toho našeho hrdinu.
An hour earlier, Tony Hill had been sitting in his favourite armchair, his games console controller in his hands, thumbs dancing over buttons as he whiled away the time until it was reasonable to expect his friend Piers Lambert to be at his Home Office desk. The warbling trill of his phone broke into his concentration, and his car spun off the road in a scream of brakes and a screech of tyres. He scowled at the handset on the table behind him, the best chance he'd had in ages to breach the final set of levels, and now it was gone. He dropped the controller and grabbed the phone, noticing as he did so that it was late enough to call Piers, just as soon as he'd dealt with whoever was on the phone. Hello? There was no welcome in his greeting. Is that you, Tony? The voice sounded like a Tory cabinet minister, posh with the edges deliberately rubbed off. A man more superstitious than Tony would have freaked out. Tony simply held the phone a few inches from his face and frowned before returning it to his ear. Piers? Is that really you? Well spotted, Tony. You don't usually cotton on so quickly. That's because you're not usually in the forefront of my mind, Piers. And I am today. I'd take that as a compliment if I knew less about the way your mind works. Why am I on your mind? There was no specific reason why being on the receiving end of a call from Piers Lambert should have unsettled Tony, but in his experience, when senior mandarins made their own phone calls, it was never the harbinger of joy. You first, he said. It's your phone bill. I'm afraid I have some rather troubling news, Lambert said. Uh-oh. When men like Lambert used words like rather troubling, most people would reach straight for nightmarish, devastating, or hellish. What's that then? It's to do with Jacko Vance. Tony hadn't heard the name for years, but still it held the power to make him feel ill. Jacko Vance was a psychopathic charmer without a trace of conscience. That made him far from unique in Tony's experience of the dark side of human nature. But Vance's destructiveness had ripped through promise that Tony had known at first hand. Vance had shattered trust in ways that few people could have imagined before his terrible damage became known. Compassion and empathy were the principles Tony had always tried to apply to his professional life, but among the many predators whose activities had threatened to strip those qualities from him, Jacko Vance had come closest. As far as Vance was concerned, the only news Tony wanted to hear was an obituary. What's happened? He said, his voice rough with anxiety. It appears he's escaped from custody. Piers sounded apologetic. Tony could picture his pained smile, his apprehensive eyes, and the way he would touch the knot of his tie for reassurance. In that instant, he wanted to grab that tie and pull it very hard. Escaped? How the fuck could that happen? Anger overtook him, not 90 in seconds. He took the place of another prisoner who had qualified for release on temporary license. He was due to spend the day at a local factory. The social worker who should have accompanied him wasn't at work, and it appears Vance attacked the driver of the taxi, taking him to the factory assignment, then made off in the taxi. Jesus Christ, Tony shouted. What in the name of God was he doing anywhere near the category of prisoner who could qualify for release on temporary license? How could that happen? Lambert cleared his throat. He's been on the therapeutic community wing at Oakworth for a couple of months now. A model prisoner by all accounts, has been for years. Tony opened and closed his mouth a couple of times, reaching for the right words and failing to find them. There was no indication that Vance had anything planned, Lambert continued, his voice smooth and unruffled. Tony found his voice. Piers, what in the name of God was Vance doing on a therapeutic community wing? He's on a whole life tariff, for crying out loud. Why is he occupying a space in a rehab program designed for people who have come to terms with their crimes, people who are working towards release, people who have a future that isn't behind bars? Answer me, damn it. Who put him in a place he could exploit, a place he could manipulate for his own ends? The perfect bloody place for someone like him to take advantage of. Lambert sighed heavily. There will, of course, be an inquiry. The psychologist who was assigned to him made the case for him to move to the therapeutic community wing. He's been Category C for a couple of years now, you know. Cat C, Tony exploded. After what he's done, God knows how many teenage girls mutilated and murdered, and he's downgraded from Cat A to Cat C. Technically, he's serving a single life sentence for a single murder. Not to mention the murder of a police officer, Tony continued, ignoring Lambert's response, a police officer who was trying to make sure no more girls died. Nevertheless, we can only punish what we can prove, and the Court of Appeal found the conviction in respect of Detective Constable Bowman to be unsafe. As I said, Vance was a model prisoner. The governor of his previous prison held out as long as he could, but there were no grounds on which the authorities could refuse to reduce his threat category. Tony picked up a note of frustration in Lambert's voice. It was good to feel that he wasn't alone in his outrage at what he was hearing. His lawyer threatened us with the Human Rights Act, and we both know how that would have gone. So Vance was reduced to Cat C and transferred to Oakworth. This psychologist, was it a woman? Yes, as it happens. Lambert sounded startled, but entirely competent. And entirely susceptible to Jacko Vance's charms, Tony said sadly. If anyone had asked me, I would have insisted that no female staff come into direct contact with Vance. He's clever, he's charming, and he's got the knack of making men and women, but women in particular, feel like they're the only person in the world. He'll have made all the right noises about remorse and the need to atone, and what harm could it do to move him to a prison community where he could deal with his issues from the past. Even if he was never going to be returned to society, the system owed him that small kindness. Tony made a sharp noise of disgust. I could write the script, Piers. I'm sure you could, Tony. Unfortunately, there's no mechanism for allowing those involved in tracking down a criminal to have input into what happens to them once they fall within the remit of the prison system. Tony jumped out of his chair and began pacing the room. And he managed to impersonate another prisoner well enough to get out of Oakworth. How the hell did he manage that? I mean, Vance is the original one-armed man. He's got a bloody prosthetic arm. Not to mention the fact that he used to be on primetime TV. Millions of people could pick him out of a lineup. How come the duty officers didn't recognise Jacko bloody Vance? You are out of the loop, aren't you? Don't you remember Vance brought a case under the Human Rights Act against the Home Office? Yeah, he said he was being discriminated against because he wasn't being fitted with the latest prosthetics, and the court upheld his position. But it's still a prosthetic, Piers. It's not an arm like you and me have got. You don't know much about the state-of-the-art prosthetics, do you, Tony? We're not talking about some bog-standard NHS artificial limb here. What Vance has got now is almost indistinguishable from what you and I have got. According to the brief I've got, he had surgery to reroute nerves, which in turn send messages to the electronics in the arm and the hand. He can move the fingers and thumb independent of each other. Over the top of it, he's got a bespoke cosmesis, which apparently is a fake skin, complete with freckles, veins, tendons, the lot. The whole kit and caboodle cost thousands of pounds. And we paid for that. No, he went private. This beggars belief, Tony said. He's a convicted killer and he gets to have private medical care. He was legitimately a multimillionaire. He could afford it. And the court said he had the right to the best treatment available. I know it sounds insane, but that's the law for you. You're right, it does sound insane. Tony reached the far wall again and slapped his hand hard against it. I thought the families of his victims sued him. How come he's still awash with cash? Because he was clever with it. At last, a tinge of anger had crept into Lambert's voice. As soon as he was arrested, Vance made arrangements to take his money offshore. It's all tied up in trusts abroad, the kind of jurisdictions where we have no way of discovering who the trustees are or who the beneficiaries of the trusts are. The civil court judgments against Vance can't be enforced against an offshore trust. But when he needed funds for surgery, they were made available. It's hugely offensive, but there's nothing we can do legally to prevent it. Unbelievable. Tony shook his head. But even if the arm wasn't obvious, how did he manage to fool everybody? Lambert groaned. God knows. What I'm hearing is that the prisoner in question has a shaved head, glasses, and distinctive tattoos on his arms and neck, all of which Vance had copied. Someone obviously brought in custom-made tattoo sleeves or transfers with the appropriate designs. The person most likely to realize it was the wrong man was the social worker, and she wasn't in work today. Tony gave a sarcastic laugh. Don't tell me, let me guess. Something completely unpredictable happened to her. Her boyfriend was kidnapped or her house blew up or something. I have no idea, Tony. All I know is that she wasn't there, so in their infinite wisdom, the officers sent him off in a taxi to his work placement. I'm told it's standard operating procedure in cases like this. Don't forget, the prisoners who get sent on these placements are on a trajectory towards release. It's in their interest not to mess up. This is the most terrifying news I've heard in a long time. You know that? There's going to be bodies, Piers. An involuntary shudder rippled across Tony's shoulders. How's the taxi driver? Is he still alive? He has head injuries, but I'm told they're not life-threatening. Lambert sounded dismissive. What concerns me most is that we recapture Vance as swiftly as possible, and that's where you come in. Me? I haven't spoken to Vance since before his first trial. I've no idea where his head's at these days. You've got a prison psychologist who apparently knew him well enough to put him in a therapeutic community. Talk to her. Tony let out a sharp breath of exasperation. We will, of course, but I have huge respect for your abilities, Tony. I was very much on the sidelines when you put a stop to Vance all those years ago, but I remember the impact your work had on the Home Office attitude towards profiling. I want to send you the files on Vance, and I want you to provide us with as detailed an assessment as possible of what he's likely to do and where he's likely to go. Lambert had recovered his poise. His request had all the force of insistence without being obvious. It'd be guesswork at best. When it came to the big beasts of officialdom, Tony knew better than to offer any shred of hope that could be used later as a stick to beat him with. Your guesswork is better by far than the considered opinion of most of your colleagues. When all else fails, Tony thought, wheel out the flattery. One thing I will say, even without the benefit of the files, what's that? I don't know where Mickey Morgan is these days, but you need to track her down and tell her Vance is on the loose. In Vance's worldview, she'll still be his wife. It doesn't matter that it was never a marriage in the first place or that she had it annulled. As far as he's concerned, she let him down. He doesn't like being thwarted. Tony stopped pacing and leaned his forehead against the door. As we all found out to our cost the last time, he's a killer, Piers. Anyone who's ever crossed him is at serious risk. There was a moment's silence. When Lambert spoke again, there was a gentleness in his voice that Tony had never heard before. Doesn't that apply to you too, Tony? You and DCI Jordan. You're the ones who brought him down, you and your team of baby profilers. If you think he's going after the people he blames for his incarceration, surely you're at the top of the list. It was a measure of Tony's lack of narcissism that Lambert's concern had genuinely not occurred to him. Years of clinical practice had taught him to bury his own vulnerability so deep he'd almost lost sight of it himself. And although he knew plenty about the chinks in Carol Jordan's armour, he was so accustomed to thinking of her as her own worst enemy that he'd all but forgotten there were other threats out there, threats that could undermine her far more comprehensively than her own weaknesses. I hadn't thought of that, he said now, shaking his head, not wanting to believe himself a possible target, because once he admitted that, everything he did would be tainted and skewed by the fear of who Vance might destroy next. I think you ought to be aware of the possibility, Lambert said. I'll have the files uploaded and send you the codes to access them. As soon as we hear anything from the police in North Yorkshire, I'll be in touch. I never said... But you will, Tony. You know you will. We'll talk soon. And he was gone. For a split second, Tony thought about phoning Carol. But news like this was always better delivered face to face. He grabbed his car keys and jacket and headed for the door. He was halfway to Bradfield Police Headquarters when he remembered he'd had his own reasons for talking to Piers Lambert. But even though he thought he truly believed that no individual life was worth more than another, he had to acknowledge that when it came to it, saving Carol Jordan was always going to trump anything else. It wasn't an entirely comfortable conclusion, but it was inescapable. And so, we met Vance, we met Tony. Vance is now out of jail, as we know.
Takže jsme potkali Vance, potkali jsme Tonyho, Vance je teď venku z basy.
And in this final section, we're going to hear from him again.
A tady v této závěrečné části o něm znovu uslyšíme.
Vance woke up with a start, heart racing, all his senses on full alert. For a moment, he had no idea where he was, thrashing around in the big bed and getting tangled in the unfamiliar duvet. Then the silence sank in and he remembered. He was not where he expected to be. He was miles away from his confined cell in HMP Oakworth. He was in Vinton Woods, in a house owned by a Cayman Islands corporation whose sole director was Patrick Gordon, the name in one of the passports in the briefcase Terry had given him. He rolled over and snapped on the bedside lamp. Its white glass shade cast a soft light over part of the room. That was novel in itself. The light in his cell at Oakworth had illuminated every corner, exposing its limits and its limitations. But this glow left things to the imagination. Vance liked that. The bedding, though, was lamentable. That would have to go. Terry had been working class to the core. He really believed that black satin sheets meant you'd arrived. Vance looked at his watch and was surprised to see it was barely 10 o'clock. He'd been asleep for about 6 hours, but now he was in that peculiar state of still being tired and yet alert. Something had woken him up, some anxiety that had invaded his dreams, and now he couldn't quite grasp it. He got out of bed, enjoying the feel of soft, rich carpeting beneath his feet. He had a piss, realized he felt hungry, and padded downstairs to the kitchen. Another freedom to luxuriate in. He switched on the lights, pleased to notice there was no obvious sign of his earlier violence. He wasn't naive enough to think he'd destroyed all the forensic traces of what had taken place, but he wasn't anticipating any forensic scientists examining the place. To the casual observer, to the estate agent who would soon be selling the place, there was nothing amiss. Vance opened the fridge and laughed out loud. Terry had clearly done a commando raid on Marks and Spencer. Ready meals, fresh meat and veg, fruit, milk, champagne, and freshly squeezed orange juice. He pulled out the fizz and popped the cork one-handed while he decided what to eat. He settled on some Chinese appetizers but struggled to make sense of the oven controls. Eventually he worked it out, but the edge had gone from his good mood. As he poured a second glass of champagne, he recalled what lay behind the spike of anxiety that had woken him. He hadn't checked the camera feeds. That was mostly because he hadn't actually explored the house before exhaustion had knocked the feet from under him. If he'd seen a computer, it would have reminded him. He prowled through the darkened house, not wanting to draw attention by snapping lights on and off. He found a dining room, a TV room, a sitting room, and finally, tucked away at the back of the house, a study. The soft moonlight from outside was enough to navigate by, and he crossed to the desk, turning on a lamp that cast a pool of light over the dark wooden desk. Terry had clearly run out of imagination by the time he'd got to the study. A big desk, an extravagantly padded leather chair, and a credenza were the sole furnishings. A laptop sat on the desk, a printer on the credenza. Vance assumed the oblong box on the windowsill that flashed a trembling array of blue lights at him was the wireless router. He'd seen pictures of routers on the internet, but never the real thing until now. He flipped open the laptop. Terry had wanted to get an Apple. He said it was better for what Vance wanted, but he knew his learning curve was going to be steep as it was. The computers he'd been able to access in Oakworth had been old and slow, the access to the internet severely restricted. He couldn't help laughing. What the fuck were they thinking, letting someone like him loose on computers? If he'd been in charge, he would never have allowed inmates access to mobiles or the net. If you wanted to stop prisoners communicating with the outside world, then ban mobile phone coverage from the prison. Never mind inconveniencing the staff. If you were serious about keeping a grip on your prisoners, you had to do shit like that. He'd bet you couldn't get a mobile signal in a gulag. He could hardly believe how quickly the machine booted up. It was a thing of beauty compared to what he'd grown used to. He went back to the kitchen to fetch the briefcase and opened it on the desk beside the laptop. Vance took out a small address book and thumbed it open at U and directed the web browser to the first of a list of URLs on the page. It opened an anonymous-looking website that asked for a password. Then he went to the letter C and typed in the first string of letters and numbers on the page. C is for camera, he said aloud as he waited for the page to open. Seconds later, he was looking at a screen divided into quarters. One quarter was in complete darkness. One showed a brightly lit kitchen. Beyond that, a dining area. Beyond that still, a sitting area with a vast inglenook fireplace. It looked like a barn conversion, judging by the scale and the hammer beams in the ceiling. Another showed the same open-plan space, but from the other end. A man was sprawled on a long leather sofa, greying blonde hair, indistinct features, a T-shirt with a logo Vance didn't recognize, and a pair of boxer shorts. Over to one side, a woman was sitting at a desk, tapping on a laptop. Beside her was a glass of red wine. The fourth quadrant showed the top of an open staircase leading to a gallery bedroom. It was hard to make out much detail, but it looked as if there was a bathroom and a dressing room behind the main area. Vance watched, fascinated, a self-satisfied smile on his face as nothing much happened. So many private investigators, so few scruples. Ask around and you could find one who would do more or less anything, as long as you could find a way of dressing it up in some guise that made it sound remotely legitimate. It hadn't been cheap to get the cameras in place, but it had been worth every penny. He wanted to be sure exactly how the land lay before he took on this act of revenge. He closed out the window and repeated the process with another access code. This time, the views were external. They showed a large Edwardian house set in a good-sized garden. The cameras showed the approach to the front door, a view of the living room from the outside, a wide shot of the back of the house and the driveway. In the light from the nearby street lamps, the house appeared to be empty. The curtains were open, the windows dark. Vance nodded, still smiling. "It's not going to be dark forever," he said, moving on to the third access code. Again, 4 camera angles. A gravel drive leading to a long, low farmhouse covered in some kind of creeper. Very English. He could see what looked like a stable block in the distance, lit by floodlights. Next, the block itself. He'd seen places like this all over the country, the brick and wooden frontages of stable yards where horses occupied the stalls, paid for by the largesse of rich men and women, and tended by ill-paid workers who loved the beasts more than most of their owners ever would. A figure passed across the yard, his movements jagged. A beam of light arced out from one hand. He shone the light jerkily on each door in turn before disappearing from sight. The third quadrant showed the rear of the house, while the fourth was a long shot of the approach to the drive. Parked across the entrance was a horse box, making it impossible for a vehicle to pass. Vance's smile grew broader. Anticipation was so sweet. Reassured by what he had seen, he closed the computer down. There were other sets of cameras waiting to be activated, but now wasn't the time. If his cameras were picked up on one of his early hits, he imagined the police would sweep all the other possible locations for hidden surveillance. If there was no electronic signal, they would be almost impossible to find, or so Terry had told him. It would be nice to keep tabs on all his targets all the time, but he was willing to hold back in the interests of keeping ahead of the game. This time, he took the precaution of carrying the briefcase upstairs with him. Now he had satisfied his curiosity. He was feeling sleepy again. The spy cameras were every bit as good as he'd been promised. If he'd had any doubts about whether he could carry out his mission, they were all dispelled. Tomorrow, the next phase would begin. Tomorrow, there would be blood. Thank you.
I psovi se to líbí. Takže pokud budete mít nějaké dotazy, já zase pošlu mikrofon, prosím nějak spořádaně si ho tady předávejte. Má někdo už teď rozmyšlený nějaký první dotaz?
Dobrý večer, děkujeme za sugestivní napjaté čtení. Chtěl bych se zeptat, jak jste se připravovala konkrétně například na tento text, jakým způsobem pracujete, jaké tam máte rytmy, co vás zrychlí a co vám dělá nějaké problémy.
The question was, first there was a compliment that it was like suggestive and very fast, good read. And second, the question is, how do you prepare when you are writing? In what way you work? Do you have any rhythms or any particular problems which you encounter while writing?
I used to, when I started off writing, I had quite a regimented way of doing it. I used to work out my plot in advance and write out notes chapter by chapter. So I had a very detailed plan of the structure of the novel from beginning to end. And I would start at the beginning and work my way through to the end of the book. And about 10 books ago, it stopped working for me. Right in the middle of a book. It was very frightening. So this method just didn't work anymore. And now what I do is I have a general sense of the shape of the story. I know what the end of the book's probably going to be, so I know what I'm aiming towards. I know roughly I know what the story is about. I know the arc of the story, but I don't know the details along the way. So I start at the beginning and I just fare forward to the end. It's a much shorter process. It takes about 3 months now to write a book. All the stuff goes on in my head beforehand. And it's very intense while it lasts. And the real problem is that for 3 months I can't do anything very much except write and eat and sleep. But it does seem to work. The American writer E.L. Doctorow has called the way he writes driving at night writing. So you start from a particular place and you're aiming towards a particular destination, but all you can see is the little bit of road in front of your headlights. So you have to keep driving forward, hoping that all these little bits of road will join up and take you where you want to go. But sometimes where you end up is a little bit different from where you thought you were going to end up. And you just have to trust yourself.
Mm-hmm. Takže dřív jsem většinou psala prostě v takovým trošku jako určitým režimu, že jsem měla napřed vymyšlený celý ten příběh. Dokonce jsem si dělala i jakoby poznámky k jednotlivým kapitolám a pak jsem to prostě napsala podle těch poznámek jako tady tím způsobem. Problém je, že asi před 10 knížkami mi to tady ten způsob přestal fungovat. A někde uprostřed knížky, což bylo docela mě to vyděsilo tehdy a od té doby jsem se přesunula trošku k jinému systému, což je, že já mám v podstatě jako takovou představu v té hlavě, jakým způsobem to má začít, jak to má skončit. Nicméně nemám promyšlený úplně ty detaily a prostě píšu. A normálně mi to teď trvá asi 3 měsíce, než napíšu knížku, takže se to prostě stane velmi rychle, nějak se to tak poudává v mé hlavě. Americký spisovatel E.L. Doctorow říká, že tady ten způsob psaní je trošku jako ježdění po tmě. Vlastně vy víte, kde máte začátek té cesty, víte, kde je konec té cesty a vidíte kousek té cesty před sebou, kam svítí světla, ale v podstatě jenom tak doufáte, že ty jednotlivé kousky se nakonec jako propojí a skutečně se dostanete tam, kam chcete. A sem tam se prostě stane, že aj skončíte někde jinde, než jste původně chtěli, ale je to proces. Next question.
Good evening. In the Middle Age, there was written something about people from 5.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is if also now is something typical for this region where you was born. And then I want to know how you will vote about Scotland and what do you know about our Moravian nation here. Thanks. Takže se ptal, jestli nám může přiblížit kraj Fife, kde se, nevím, jestli to vyslovuji správně, kde se autorka narodila a jak bude to s referendem a co ví o nás.
The area of Scotland where I grew up, Fife, is it's a very distinct region. It's on the east coast of Scotland, and to the south, across the Firth of Forth, is Edinburgh, and to the north, across the Firth of Tay, is Dundee. And because we're surrounded on three sides by water, we've always been quite cut off. Until the 1960s, when they built the road bridges, it was an effort to get into or out of Fife. So we kind of developed our own cultural feel. It was always politically very radical. There was a lot of mining, shipbuilding, and farming and fishing. And there was, as I say, a lot of political radicalism, but socially quite conservative. So that was the world I grew up in. It was also, I suppose, quite inward-looking, quite parochial. And when I went, the school I went to, most of the people who taught me had come from Fife. They were local people. And the expectation was that you would go off to university, the nearest universities, and then you would come back and live in Fife. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted wider horizons. I wanted to reach escape velocity and have a different kind of life. And so I went to university in Oxford, and I came back to work in Scotland for a while as a journalist, and then I ended up back in England again. But just this year I have moved back to Scotland. We have, you're probably aware, a very important independence referendum in September in Scotland to decide whether we want to be an independent nation again, which we have not been for 300 years. It's also been marketed, I suppose, as the year of homecoming. The Scottish powers that be would like us all to come home, because there is a huge Scottish diaspora all around the world of talented Scottish people setting the world on fire, really, wherever we go. We have an extraordinary record of success all around the world, not just in the Commonwealth, but in other countries too. So, this is the subject that everybody is talking about all the time in Scotland at the moment, the referendum. How are you going to vote? What's going to happen? What will happen after the vote? Which way is the vote going to go? Whether you're in a taxi cab, or whether you're in the pub, or whether you're in the queue in the cheese shop, this is what people are talking about all the time. And for a very long time, I found myself unable to make up my mind. We have a very good word in Scots. It's called swithering. And swithering means you keep swinging between two different opinions. Today you think this, tomorrow you think that. Today you think this again. And because it seemed to me that both sides of the argument didn't really know the answers to what's going to happen after the vote. The people who want us to stay together, the unionists, answer the questions about the economy, about defence, about education, about health. They answer all those questions one way, and the people who want to support independence answer them in precisely the opposite way. It's impossible to get any kind of definitive answer from the politicians on any subject to do with the referendum, to do with independence. So eventually I realised that asking questions wasn't getting any proper information. So I thought that the only way in which it was possible to make a decision was to look at, I'm sorry, this is a very long answer, was to look at what the Scottish Parliament has done since it's had some powers devolved to it in the last 15 years or so. And it seemed to me that the things the Scottish Parliament has done in respect of health policy, in respect of education policy, are good social democratic things that I actually approve of, much more than I approve of what's been going on at Westminster. So on that basis, I came out last week as a yes voter. So I will be voting yes on the 18th of September because I think that's a vote for aspiration and not fear. I think if you want things to change in Scotland, we have to take our future into our own hands. And if we fail, then so be it, but at least we fail on our own terms, not because other people are telling us what to do. And that's where I'm standing on that position. I'm afraid I have to admit complete ignorance on the matter of Czech geopolitics or internal politics. I'm afraid this is not an area I know anything about, so perhaps someone can tell me later.
Okay. Takže co se týče regionu 5, nebo oblasti 5, tak on je docela jako typ specifický s mnoha věcmi. Za prvé prostě protože z jihu ho odděluje jeden takový ten záliv, oni se tomu říká Firth, a z druhé další, to znamená, že oni jsou docela izolovaní a na 3 stranách obklopení vodou, což často vede k tomu, že prostě jako obtížný odtamtud cestovat kamkoliv jinam. A vyvinulo se tam tak trošku prostě taková mentalita lehce maloměšťácká, ačkoliv je to region, který je politicky prostě radikální kvůli tomu, co se tam jako tradičně dělalo, řekněme stavba lodí, farmařina, průmysl, rybolov, tak sociálně vzato jako společensky je to hodně konzervativní, jak už jsem říkal, maloměšťácký. A problém třeba je, že lidi si často myslí, že půjdete na školu a ze školy půjdete na nějakou nejbližší možnou univerzitu a pak se vrátíte zpátky a budete prostě žít ve 5. A já jsem tady tohleto nechtěla, chtěla jsem prostě se svým životem něco udělat jinýho, takže chtěla jsem jiný život, šla jsem na Oxford, vystudovala jsem Oxford, poté jsem dělala novinářku, chvilku ve Skotsku, pak jsem se zase odstěhovala do Anglie. Teď jsem se vrátila do Skotska, žiju v Edinburghu a to se tak trošku týká toho referenda, protože jak asi všichni víte už, tak se tady chystá to referendum o nezávislosti Skotska, kdy se má zodpovědět otázka, jestli Skotsko bude po 300 letech znova nezávislou zemí. A tady tomuhle roku toho referenda se taky říká jako Year of Homecoming, což je jakoby prostě rok návratu domů. Protože Skotové mají prostě obrovskou diasporu všude po světě a tak trošku jako zaplavujeme ten svět kolem, ale většinou ti Skotové, kteří odchází ze Skotska, jsou velmi úspěšní, kdekoliv se uchytí. Takže jako je taková trošku snaha je všechny vrátit zpátky do Skotska, aby zase přispěli nějak tam. Co se toho referenda týče, tak všichni o něm mluví, prostě co se bude dít, jak to dopadne a slyšíte o tom, když jedete taxíkem, slyšíte o tom prostě v hospodě, slyšíte o tom, když stojíte frontu u stánku s rychlým občerstvením. A ve Scots máme takové slovo, what is swithering? Swithering, což prostě znamená jakoby taková nerozhodnost, že prostě jeden den si myslíte něco a druhý den si myslíte hned něco opačného, takže pořád tak jako přeskakujete z té jedné strany na druhou. Já, když jsem to tak jako porovnávala, tak vždycky ti unionisté, prostě, kteří chtějí zůstat jakoby součástí Spojeného království, tak odpovídají otázky, co se týče, řekněme, prostě lékařské péče, co se týče vzdělání, co se týče obrany, zahraniční politiky a tak dále jedním způsobem a separatisté vždycky říkají prostě úplně přesný opak. Takže politici jsou v podstatě k ničemu, jako proč nedostanou od nich jasnou odpověď. A nemá smysl se tady jich na nic ptát. Takže co jsem udělala bylo, že jsem se podívala, jak hlasoval skotský parlament, jako parlament prostě, ten autonomní parlament ve Skotsku. A dívala jsem se, jak oni hlasovali, co dělali, jaké zákony schvalovali a zjistila jsem, že to je rozumná sociálně demokratická politika, která je mi mnohem bližší než to, co praktikuje vláda prostě centrální vláda v Británii ve Westminsteru. A na základě tady tohoto porovnání jsem se rozhodla, že budu hlasovat ano. Chci hlasovat jakoby pro určitou aspiraci, protože něčeho dosáhneme a nechci hlasovat kvůli tomu, že se naopak něčeho bojím. Pokud tu nezávislost dostaneme a pokud to nějak poděláme, tak to prostě poděláme jakoby kvůli sobě a ne proto, že nám někdo říká, co máme dělat. A co se týče České republiky a Moravy, tak necítím se povolaná tady k tomuto se vyjadřovat, protože se musím přiznat, že o vnitřní politice České republiky prostě vůbec nic nevím.
I think one of the things that's very interesting also about this whole question of the referendum is that suddenly all sorts of people who are never normally expected to have any views on politics at all are being asked what we think, whether it's writers or artists or teachers or nurses. It's suddenly everybody is expected to have an opinion and entitled to have an opinion. And that's very exciting, I think. It's not just the usual political classes who are talking about this.
A jedna ještě věc, která je hodně zajímavá, co se týče tady tohoto referenda, je, že prostě z široké sorty lidí, o kterých se normálně nikdo neptá na jejich názory na politiku, řekněme spisovatelé, učitelé, zdravotní sestry a další, tak najednou všichni se jich ptají, jako co si myslíte a co by se mělo dít, takže tohle je prostě zajímavé.
And it's very difficult for us writers to be writing books at the moment because my next book comes out just before the referendum. But anything beyond that, you have to think that you're writing about beyond the referendum, but you don't know the result yet. So I think there's a lot of Scottish writers who are kind of holding back at the moment and waiting till after September the 18th before they can write their next book because we don't know how the world is going to be.
Je docela těžké teď být spisovatelem ve Skotsku, protože třeba moje knížka, tady tu, kterou zrovna píšu, nebo která se teď chystá, tak bude vydána těsně před vlastně tady tímhletím referendem. Nicméně všichni ostatní tak už musí tak jako uvažovat, že vlastně bude to prostě po tom referendu, který je v 18. září a neví vlastně, co přesně bude, jestli bude teda Skotsko nezávislé nebo nebude, prostě neví, v jaké situaci budou ty knížky vydávat, takže to je takové zvláštní.
First of all, again, my compliments, because I myself, I'm not too crazy about criminal stories, but you caught my attention, and from very first word until the last one. But I want to ask you, you don't look like you have spent some time in prison, so I would like to ask you if you have met some criminals or sentenced to life sentence perhaps, because your description of prison milieu is very accurate. And second question, the figure of Jacko Vance, did something like that happen in reality? If there was a TV personality committing crime, I myself think only about Jimmy Savile, who didn't kill girls but only their souls. So, if you can give me this answer. Jenom si pochválit, že sám nejsem moc příznivcem kriminálních příběhů, ale toto mě fakt chytlo od prvního slova. A že paní autorka nebyla ve vězení, na to vypadá, ale jestli se setkala s nějakými vrahy, třeba odsouzenými k doživotí, protože to mě přišlo velice perfektní, ten popis toho vězeňského prostředí, a jestli figura toho Jacka Vance, jestli se něco podobného stalo, že by televizní osobnost se dopustila nějaké vraždy, tedy.
With the crime novel, I think there's always a tension between accuracy and authenticity. If you're entirely accurate, then you will write a very boring book, because the true process of a criminal investigation is mostly very, very dull. So what I have to try to do is take you on this journey of suspension of disbelief. And one of the ways I do that is to make what I write feel authentic. And in order to do that, in lots of different aspects of the book, I talk to people who have direct personal experience of what I'm writing about. So I do know some people who have served time in prison. I also know people who have worked in prisons and who have worked with long-term prisoners and offenders. In the same way I talk to forensic scientists, I talk to cops. But then with some key pieces of information in place, my job is then to exercise my imagination on top of that. I'm sorry, what was the second half of the question there?
The second half.
If there was a
Oh,
personality...
Jimmy Savile, sorry, yes. When I first wrote about Jacko Vance in the book The Wire and the Blood, the original idea came to me when I was in America in the mid-1990s, and I was there when I was researching a non-fiction book, and while I was there, the trial of O.J. Simpson was going on, and also one of the people I was interviewing for the non-fiction book was a private eye who had worked on the first case of accusations of paedophilia against Michael Jackson, and she said to me there was no doubt in her mind that he was guilty, but that he had paid off the witnesses. And as I was driving around America, I was thinking about these two things, and it seemed to me that we had come to a place in our society where fame gives you a kind of shield. If you are famous enough, particularly if you're on television, and you, as it were, you come into people's living rooms and they think they know you, it's a kind of shield, it's a kind of invincibility. And so I started thinking about the plot for the book, The Wire and the Blood. And when I came to sit down and write about it, I remembered the stories I had heard when I was a journalist about, amongst other people, about Jimmy Savile, who was a disc jockey and a charity worker and a friend of the Queen and a friend of Margaret Thatcher and a man who apparently could go anywhere with impunity. And yet, at regular intervals, people would come into our office and say, when I was a child, Jimmy Savile abused me. The difficulty we had was that there was never any hard evidence. It was simply one person's word against Savile. And he was a man who was very quick to take legal action if anything was said that might paint him in a bad light. And often the people who were coming in to talk to us were quite damaged people. They were people who had problems with mental health, problems with drink, problems with drugs, obviously as a direct result of what had happened to them when they were younger, but they did not make what our office lawyers would call good witnesses. And so it seemed to me that there was a situation where this man could do these things, abuse children, abuse young people, with absolute impunity, and we couldn't do anything as journalists. And it was one of those situations where I realized that it was easier to tell the truth in fiction than it was in journalism. And so I based the character of Jacko Vance in many respects on Savile. And the interesting thing is that nobody spotted this because I made the character handsome and charming. And everybody thought it was a different television presenter I was thinking of. So I didn't get into legal trouble, but it was very much at the forefront of my mind. And I just feel, immense compassion for those people who were his victims, and nobody listened to them.
Mm-hmm. Takže když píšete jakoby kriminální příběhy, tak je tady vždycky trošku takové napětí mezi jako autenticitou těch příběhů a v podstatě tím, aby tam bylo nějaké jako napětí, protože problém je v tom, že ve skutečná detektivní práce, skutečná policejní práce je prostě strašně nudná. Kdyby se to psalo přesně jako tak, jak to je, tak by ty knížky prostě nikdo nečetl. Takže já většinou jako svoje čtenáře prostě v podstatě moje práce je vést si takovou v angličtině fráze prostě suspension of disbelief, což je, že potlačíte svou nevěřícnost, jo? Že se do toho prostě začtete a jste ochotní jako akceptovat nějaký fakta, které prostě nejsou jako víte, že to prostě takhle v realitě nejde. Ale chci být trošku jako autentická, takže se často bavím s lidma v oborech, který se týkají zrovna něčeho, o čem píšu. Například prostě lidí, co s tím mají nějakou konkrétní zkušenost. A takže třeba mluvím s policisty, mluvím s forenzními psychologi, mluvím prostě s lidmi, co tady v tomhle pracují. A poté, až jako mám ty fakta trošku tak jako vzana, tak prostě do toho přidám svou vlastní představivost a udělám z toho příběh. A co se týče té druhé otázky, když jsem psala Wire in the Blood, tak to bylo někdy prostě v polovině 90. let. V Americe zrovna probíhal proces O.J. Simpsonem a já jsem tam dělal prostě na takové knížce, která byla non-fiction, jako nebyl to prostě román. A dělal jsem rozhovor s jedním s privátním detektivem, já nevím, jak se to řekne. A ta mi prostě říkala, že dělala na případu vlastně obvinění Michaela Jacksona z pedofilie a tam došlo k tomu, že ona říkala, že si je 100% jistá, že on skutečně jako ty děti zneužíval, nicméně prostě zaplatil všechny svědky, aby proti němu nikdo prostě tady tohleto obvinění, jako aby proti němu prostě nikdo nesvědčil. A to mě tak jako vedlo, začal jsem o tom uvažovat, začal jsem si říkat, že možná vlastně ta sláva, zvlášť jako co se týče televizních osobností, lidí, kteří prostě na nás každý den promlouvají z televize, jsou vlastně tak říkajíc jako přímo v obýváku, tak dává lidem určitý jako štít před tím, aby byli hnáni k odpovědnosti za věci, které provedou. Přemýšlel jsem o tom a máte pravdu s Jimmy Savile, který byl v podstatě v Británii, že hrozně známý a byl i přítelem prostě královny a Margaret Thatcherové a on teda nebyl jako sériový vrah, ale prostě pravděpodobně zneužíval děti a začali se prostě objevovat lidi, kteří tvrdili, ano, tady ten Jimmy Savile mě prostě zneužíval, akorát problém byl v tom, že všichni tady tihleti lidi byli prostě bylo to jejich slovo proti jeho slovu a on, protože byl významná osobnost, měl peníze, takže okamžitě většinou šáhl po žalobě a to prostě lidi jakoby dost odrazovalo. Problém byl taky v tom, že často tady tihleti lidi byli dost jakoby poškození tady touhletou zkušeností, měli často problémy prostě s duševním zdravím, problémy s drogami, problémy s alkoholem. Takže jak u nás právníci vždycky říkají, že prostě nejsou z nich dobří svědci u soudu, že jim prostě nikdo nebude věřit tady těmhletěm lidem. A takže v podstatě jakoby ten Jimmy Savile vlastně zneužíval s naprostou beztrestností. A já jsem si řekla, že je v podstatě mnohem jednodušší asi ty lidi, nebo říct si, co si o těch lidech myslím v fiktivní práci, prostě v románu, než to udělat v knížce, která se věnuje novinařině, jako literatuře faktu. Takže jsem napsala Wire in the Blood a zajímavé bylo, že si toho skoro nikdo nevšiml, té podobnosti, že to bylo o něm, všichni si mysleli, že to byl někdo jiný, že to byl prostě jeden televizní moderátor. Takže ano, a myslím taky doteďka prostě cítím velkou jakoby sounáležitost s těma obětma tady tohoto jednání.
Hi, I would like to ask you two questions. The first one is whether you, during the preparation phase for this book, you had a chance to form your opinion about the prison system. For example, whether it is close to the opinion of the clinical psychologist in the book that the prison system is not strict enough, or maybe your opinion is that it's too strict, that it actually prevents some people to somehow recover and go back to normal life. So what's your opinion about the prison system, if you have any? And the second question is whether you tend to read books or literature in general that is similar to what you write. Thanks.
My personal view Sorry, you want to change?
Pardon, ano, přeložit. Jo, ptala jsem se na 2 otázky. Jestli během právě že té přípravné fáze na tuto knihu měla šanci si vytvořit nějaký názor, co se týče vězeňského systému, jestli je moc jaksi přísný nebo striktní, nebo málo striktní. A druhá otázka byla, jestli má tendenci číst knížky, které se podobají tomu, co sama píše.
My personal view is that the prison system is principally deeply flawed because it doesn't actually devote enough attention to rehabilitation, particularly for short-term prison sentences. The funding for education, for example, in prison is lamentably low. So when people are sent to prison in the UK, it essentially is a warehouse to keep them off the streets until they've served their sentence. And I personally think that a lot more attention should be paid to educating, rehabilitating, providing them with skills, providing them with education. For example, a huge number of prisoners who are in for relatively short sentences are illiterate, functionally illiterate. We should be focusing, I think, a huge amount of attention on making sure that when they leave prison, they can read and write, at the very least. It's, if you like, it's a second bite at the education cherry. As far as my own reading is concerned, I read pretty widely. I read quite a lot of crime fiction, but I also read a lot of general fiction too, literary fiction. I read some poetry. I don't read much non-fiction unless it's specifically connected to a book I'm thinking about or something I'm thinking about writing about. So that's mostly, I mostly find myself lost in somebody else's imagination.
Můj osobní náhled na vězeňský systém je, že hluboce má prostě hluboké chyby v sobě, hlavně v tom, že se nesnaží ty vězně napravovat. Takže tohle je problém hlavně u lidí, co tráví kratší tresty ve vězení a je tam prostě absolutně nedostatečné placení nebo nedostatečné finance pro další vzdělávání těch vězňů, takže ta věznice funguje jako v podstatě takové skladiště, kam je prostě ty vězně zavřeme jako na nějakou dobu a nic se tam s nimi moc dál neděje. A myslím si, že by tam prostě mělo být mnohem větší jakoby financování, co se týče vzdělání, snaha o nápravu těch vězňů. Třeba například velká část těch lidí, co jsou ve vězení, jsou prostě funkčně negramotní. A tam by se rozhodně mělo zajistit, aspoň když z té věznice vylezou, aby dokázali číst, psát, aby prostě se naučili třeba nějaké věci, které jim pak pomůžou získat nějakou dobrou práci a tak dál. A když se na to díváte tady tímhletím pohledem, tak v podstatě jakoby ten čas, který stráví ve vězení, je jakby taková druhá příležitost dostat nějaké vzdělání. A tady ta příležitost je v podstatě jako nevyužitá. A co se týče literatury, kterou čtu obecně, tak čtu hodně, jak kriminálky, tak třeba prostě jiný romány ze všech možných oblastí, čtu poezii. Nečtu moc literatury faktu, pokud se to přímo netýká něčeho, o čem zrovna píšu. Má tady nějaký další dotaz?
Hello, I was wondering what first drew you to a life of crime writing?
Otázka byla, co autorku poprvé přitáhlo k psaní jakoby o zločinu.
I wanted to be a writer from the moment I realized that it was actually a job that people got paid money for. So that the books in the library didn't just appear by magic. When I grew older, when I finished university and decided that this was now I was going to really try to become a proper published writer, I started off trying to write literary fiction. I had some success writing plays, but I didn't really know what I was doing, so that was a fairly limited success. And I kind of got stuck. I knew I wanted to write, but I didn't know what I wanted to write. And I gradually understood that what I needed to concentrate on was a form of fiction where I understood what was going on, what the organizing principles were, if you like. And I'd always read a lot of crime fiction. When I was young, I used to spend a lot of time staying with my grandparents, and there wasn't a library in the village where they lived, and the only book they had apart from the Bible was a copy of Agatha Christie's The Murder at the Vicarage. And so whenever I ran out of books to read, I just reread The Murder at the Vicarage. And so I formed a taste for Agatha Christie, and then from there I broadened it out into a much wider enjoyment of crime fiction. So I'd always read a lot of crime fiction alongside everything else that I read. So once I'd figured out that what I needed to do was to choose a form where I understood what was going on, it seemed to make sense to try to write crime fiction. And the thing that really kick-started me from this vague idea of that was what I should do to actually starting it was Sarah Paretsky, the American private eye writer. She published her first book, Indemnity Only, in 1982. And when I read that book, it was that light bulb moment. Light bulb goes on in your head. I think that's the kind of book I want to write. It had a female protagonist with a brain and a sense of humor and self-reliance. It was set in an urban environment, which I understood much better than I understood English villages. And it also had politics. It had social politics and it had personal politics. And I thought, this is the kind of book I want to write. And so that was really what made me take that leap into actually doing it instead of just thinking about it. I'm incapable of giving a short answer, I'm sorry.
Vždycky jsem chtěla psát, nebo respektive chtěla jsem psát od doby, kdy jsem zjistila, že být spisovatelem je prostě práce, za kterou člověk může dostat zaplaceno. A která je jako skutečná práce, takže od té doby jsem chtěla být spisovatelkou, takže jsem udělala univerzitu a chtěla jsem dál psát a pokoušela jsem se psát nějaké, řekněme, jako normální romány a taky jsem měla drobné úspěchy, co se týče dramatu, akorát prostě problém byl, že jsem přesně nevěděla, jak se to dělá, nebo nevěděla jsem, jak to přesně dělat. A takže jsem se trošku jakoby tam zasekla a nevěděla jsem, co moc dál. A no prostě přišla jsem na to, že psaní o jako detektivek je forma, kde rozumím tomu principu, kterým se tady psaním nebo kterým se obecně tady tento žánr řídí. A myslím si, že tady tohleto jsem nějak tak jako získala, když jsem trávila čas u prarodičů, protože jediná knížka, kterou měli kromě Bible, byla Agatha Christie, její prostě série knížek, takže tam jsem to vždycky četla a tam jsem asi nabila jakoby prostě tu znalost toho, co dělá ten kriminální žánr prostě tím, čím je. Pochopila jsem ten organizující princip jakoby tady téhleté formy. What was the surname of that?
Sarah Paretsky.
Sarah Paretsky, která napsala Indemnity.
Indemnity Only.
Indemnity Only, knížka v roce 1982.
1982, yeah.
Yeah. Takže ona měla protagonistku, která byla jakoby samostatná, měla smysl pro humor, byla prostě vtipná a to mě hodně oslovilo, protože jsem viděla, že se to dá, jako chytlo mě to. Taky to nebylo to samozřejmě jenom o tom zločinu, byla tam i prostě jako nějaká politika, bylo to zasazené v městském prostředí a městskému prostředí jsem rozuměla víc než nějakému prostě anglickému venkovu. Takže to bylo takový ten moment, který mě poslal psát o zločinu.
Jak se vyvíjel váš vztah v průběhu celé doby, co píšete, a to už nějaký rok je, k nakladatelům? Jak to začínalo, jak to probíhalo, jak to je teď, jak jste s tím spokojená a jak se necháte od nich, jak bych to nazval, manipulovat?
The question is about your relationship with the publishing houses. what are your impressions from working with them? How does the relationship with them develops? And whether you let yourself be perhaps manipulated by them?
I don't think I would characterize the relationship as one of manipulation. I've been very lucky. I have had two main editors throughout most of my career, and both of them have been tremendously supportive of my wanting to write different kinds of books. I don't just write one kind of book, and that's sometimes difficult for publishers to sell to readers. I regard the process of writing as a collaborative process. My editor is there to help me make my book better, to make my book as good as I can make it. And as I say, I've been lucky to have editors who have fulfilled that. I have a very good relationship with I think all of my publishing houses. I'm translated into something like somewhere between 35 and 40 languages. And certainly it seems to me that I'm very well served by my publishers. I know that not everyone would necessarily say the same thing, but I can only speak to my own experience. I think one of the job of the publisher has changed in one respect. When I first started doing what I do, the job of the publisher was to help me make my book be as good as it could be and then to sell it to as many people as they could sell it to. There is now a third element to their job, which is to protect my work from theft, from internet. And people call it piracy, and I'm not going to glamorize it with the name of piracy because it is not piracy, it's not swashbuckling, it's theft. As soon as you take away the integrity of my copyright, you take away the integrity of my work. You take away the opportunity for future generations to make a living from their talent, and thus you take away the opportunity for them to develop their talents. And so for me, my publisher now has that very, very important third role. I've spoken to the European Parliament, I've spoken to the British Parliament on behalf of the Publishers Association about the importance of copyright, because it's interesting, politicians never seem to understand the importance of copyright until they write their memoirs. So at the moment there is a big campaign going on throughout Europe to preserve the integrity of copyright, and that's something that, you know, that the publishing business, if you like, has really got behind, and that protects people like me.
Nemyslím si, že se mnou nějak jako manipulují ti nakladatelé. Vždycky jsem měla asi štěstí na to, protože hlavně spolupracuji se dvěma editory v tom smyslu jako revizory a že oni vždycky podporovali prostě to, že já jsem psala docela jako odlišné knížky, jako odlišné typy knížek a v rámci své práce, a oni prostě vždycky ta spolupráce s nimi vypadala jako trošku proces spolupráce. Měla jsem zkrátka tady na tady tohleto štěstí, že jsem měla tady tyhle nakladatele. Což se třeba odráží v tom, že mě přeložili do 30 až 40 jazyků. Takže jako vždycky mě obsloužili velmi dobře. Není to samozřejmě nutně jakoby zkušenost úplně všech spisovatelů, ale je to moje soukromá zkušenost. Nicméně trošku se ještě ta práce těch nakladatelů v poslední době mění, a mění se tím, že k jejich základní jakoby práci nebo náplní, která je napřed vám pomoct udělat co nejlepší knížku dokážete a tu pak prodat co největšímu množství lidí, je to, že teď musí toho autora chránit před krádeží jeho duševního vlastnictví a vlastně udržovat tu integritu toho copyrightu. Já často se tomu říká prostě internetové pirátství, já to nebudu nějak jakoby romantizovat tím názvem pirátství, protože je to prostě krádež, a je to nebezpečný proto, že to nejenom, že jako to prostě lidem ubírá peníze, ale hlavně proto, že to znemožňuje jakoby těm dalším generacím spisovatelům rozvíjet svůj talent, protože prostě nedostanou nikoho zaplaceno. Takže vlastně k těm vydavatelům teď přibyla ta třetí jejich náplň práce, která je právě chrání toho autora před internetovou krádeží. A já jsem tady o tomhle mluvila jak před Evropským parlamentem, tak před britským parlamentem. Snažila jsem se zdůrazňovat nutnost zachovávat copyright. Je trošku vtipné, že politici si většinou jako neuvědomují důležitost toho copyrightu do té doby, než se pokouší vydávat své paměti a pak jim to většinou dojde. Takže vím, že je teď prostě kampaň v Evropě na ochranu copyrightu a já se toho účastním.
Do you have some jokes about shortly? Yeah. Do you have some jokes about some regions or parts of Scotland?
Jokes about Scotland?
Not about Scotland, about some typical regions. I don't know, maybe some islands or Albany island.
Regions inside Scotland.
Jokes about regions in Scotland. Well, it's a joke that people tell. In the Western Isles, you know, life goes at a very steady pace, and it's a story about a Spanish visitor coming to the Scottish Islands, and he's trying to explain to this Scottish islander the concept of mañana, you know, that something can wait. And the Scotsman is having great difficulty understanding this. He said, I'm sorry, can you just explain that to me again? I don't think I quite understand. So the Spaniard explains again to him the concept of mañana. And the Scotsman scratches his head and he says, you know, he says, we have nothing to express a concept so urgent.
So
urgent.
Oh, urgent.
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 Yeah.
Aha. Já jsem zpomalený trošku. Takže jenom zkráceně, ano, máme třeba vtip o západních ostrovech. A je to o tom, že tam prostě přijde Španěl tady na tyhle a vidí ty obyvatele těch západních ostrovů, o kterých se vždycky říká, že tam život jde tak trošku pomalu, takovým tím trošku venkovským tempem. A snaží se mu vysvětlit koncept maňány, jako maňána, jako prostě někdy potom, co se říká ve Španělsku. A ten Skot tomu prostě vůbec nerozumí, pořád se jako tak drbe na hlavě a můžete mi to vysvětlit znova a až mu to nakonec vysvětlí, tak on jako pochopí a říká, že ale to je prostě ten problém v tom, že jako Skot nemá jakékoliv slovo pro něco tak jako, co musí být tak nutně rychle udělaného, jako maňána.
You'll have had your tea. It's a private joke.
Okay. So, thank you, Val, for reading here. This is the last question. My bychom měli všichni poděkovat.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks for the fantastic work. Thank you. Thank you very much. And your name is?
Mirka.
Mirka, okay. How do I spell that? Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks. How is the typical stereotype about people from Wales or from Cornwall in Scotland, maybe.
From Cornwall.
About Cornwall or Wales, do you have such stereotypes?
Well,
We have here many jokes about people from Scotland, and we have here many stereotypes about people from Scotland also. But stereotypes about Wales or Cornwall or concretely parts of
I'm
British
not
countries.
very interested in stereotypes, I have to say.
So one autograph bigger maybe.
Okay.
It's you can. And if I can ask you for your email address.
You can. Yeah.
And thanks for your answers.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Sure.
And here you are subscribed, please. Vera.
It's for your name? Your name?
Vera.
Vera.
Vera. Vera. Yeah. Thanks so very much. Nice subscribe.
Thanks. May I ask you for the autograph? Of course.
So if you want to just okay, that's a problem.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sorry, may I ask you here?
Yeah. Yep. Thank you. Thanks.
And the lady wants to ask a few things. So
Yeah.
But because we need to get the stage.
Yeah. Okay.
For you first.